Hey, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nick Behringer, where we talk about optimally fueling the warrior athlete. Now that can be, nutritionally, but today it's going to be cognitively, as we are very lucky to have a well-accomplished guest, over 30 years of military service. Started out in the infantry side of things, served in 1st Ranger Battalion, as an operator, as a trigger puller, if you will. Went into special operations, then got out, went to medical school, became a physician, and then continued to serve in the military as a physician, saving the lives of those in special operations. Now an author, just wrote the book Honed, which I have read. Great book we're going to talk about today. Also a speaker and works with other organizations in terms of training folks so they can save lives. Without further ado, let me welcome the great, the knowledgeable, the well-accomplished Dr. Mike Simpson. Mike, welcome.
Thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Did I leave anything out? Was there anything in your bio that I didn't cover there?
No, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. That's probably the only thing that's probably not in there.
That was, yeah. I don't know where you put that in there. So what I'd like to start off, Mike, is one, these opinions are Mike's. Anything we share here or talk about, because he's out of the military, out of the DoD. But one thing I always like to start off with is, kind of what's your Army story? What brought you in the Army?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I grew up, I was born in the South Bay area, California. Don't hold that against me. So the Los Angeles area, lived in a couple of different places: Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, Inglewood, Lawndale. When I was about 11 years old, my dad took a job in what California now refers to as the Inland Empire up in Palmdale. And we didn't want to live there, so we picked a little town called Tehachapi, which is where I spent my formative years. So very small town, working class upbringing, hunting, fishing, fixing up old cars, playing football. And this was the 1980s. And being, for those that aren't that old or don't recall, so the 1970s was kind of a rough time in the U.S. In fact, I draw a lot of parallels where the environment now is very similar on a political and global scale to the late 60s, early 70s, and how they were and everybody's kind of mentality. And the 70s were a rough time, especially in the military and as a country. And then in the 1980s, all of a sudden it became cool to be patriotic again. Like having an American flag on your porch was a cool thing again. And in small town America, we never really lost that in the town that I grew up in. But it became kind of fashionable for people to volunteer to go in the military. And I went and started talking to all the military recruiters at a pretty young age, and figured out pretty early on that I wanted to do something really challenging. Whenever they would say things like, well, only about 1% of people can even do this, that really caught my attention. I wanted to be a part of something larger than myself. I wanted to do something that no matter what I did with the rest of my life, because of course I didn't realize I was going to have a 32-year career. I thought it was just going to be a 4-year military career. But I wanted to be able to look back on that for decades and go, yeah, I did that. Not everybody could do that, and I did it. I put myself to the hazard. I passed the crucible, and I made it through, and I did that. So I got a Ranger contract at a high school. 2 weeks out of after graduating from a high school, I shipped off to basic training on an unassigned Ranger contract. Went to infantry basic, went to airborne school, went to, at the time was still Ranger indoctrination program in Savannah, Georgia at Hunter Army Airfield. And did 4 years in 1st Ranger Battalion. Really enjoyed my time there, and knew that I wanted to get out and try my hand in the civilian world. I had a lot of thoughts about being a police officer, being on a SWAT team, maybe being a Secret Service agent or a DEA agent. So I got out, but I stayed in the Special Forces National Guard out of Florida. And a few years later, of course, after I got out, I got off active duty in '88. Just a few years later, Desert Shield, Desert Storm popped up, and we got mobilized for that, although we didn't deploy. And that was the point that I realized, I kind of miss being on active duty. This really was a lifestyle that I was a lot more accustomed to. I had dabbled in doing my undergraduate at Georgia Southern University. Wasn't really applying myself. I was working as a prison guard at night. Wasn't really enjoying that. And there was a lot of all the things that stereotypically you hear people say about the military. Nobody's in charge. Everybody's out of uniform. The thing that really drove me crazy was nobody was on time. That was there was no punctuality in the civilian sector, and it was driving me absolutely crazy. So I decided going back on active duty was the right move for me. So I finished Special Forces training as a Special Forces Engineer Sergeant, 18 Charlie. Went to 7th Special Forces Group, and then after a few years, decided I wanted something different. I went to the medic course. I became an 18 Delta. Went back to my old battalion in 7th Group and served on a team in that capacity. That was the point that I realized that medicine was a little bit of a calling for me. And I decided that I was either going to be a PA or go to medical school. My first choice being PA, and the Army told me I was too old and I had too many years of service, but they would let me go to med school. So I had to take option B, which was going to med school, and went to medical school at Uniformed Services University, graduated, did an emergency medicine residency in San Antonio, of course, which you're obviously very well familiar with. Yeah. And then got an assignment to the Joint Medical Augmentation Unit at JSOC out of Fort Bragg, and that's where I finished out my operational time in the military.
Wow, I mean, what a tremendous story there, and I want to kind of touch on your time, or at least something you put in the book about your time at Bragg there, December 2013. You're on a Ranger mission in northern Afghanistan. Going up a mountain, 8-click infill, full kit with these young Rangers, and you're 48 years old. So was that your fitness aha moment, or was everything leading up to that? Like how do you stay in the fight at 48 with those young Rangers?
Yeah, well, fortunately the aha movement came during residency. That's I'm not exceedingly athletic. I don't have a lot of genetic gifts. I'm 5'6". I come from a mixed ancestry, but mostly Welsh ancestry. There's not a lot of really well-known world-class Welsh athletes, and that's for a reason. Okay, we don't win marathons. We're not really well known in the field of athletics. You don't see a lot of sprint swimmers coming out of Wales or anything like that. So, not saying that I had a disadvantage, but I didn't fit when most people think of the classic special operator image. They probably think of my good friend Tim Kennedy. They don't think of somebody who's built like me. So, but even with that being said, with hard work, I was able to apply myself. I was always, I'm just going to have to do a little bit of extra PT in order to keep up with everybody else because I got short, stumpy legs. Because I'm smaller and I weigh less than my teammates, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time working on my strength so that I don't fall behind, so I can carry an appropriate combat load. And I was able to kind of get away with what a lot of us are able to get away with on through my 20s and 30s, which is, I can ignore my fitness for a while, and then, okay, when I need to, I just need to buckle down, 2 weeks of hard work, and watch what I eat, and I'll be back on track again. And that worked for me throughout my career, because we all know that in the military, you have long periods of time where you might not be able to work out, or you go on leave and you neglect it, or you go to a school, or you deployed, and then you go, okay, now's the time. I got to get back in shape. I've got a physical event coming up, or I got a PT test coming up. So I need to really do this. So I'm going to dedicate myself. So 5 days a week, I'm really going to do this for 2 straight weeks. I'm going to blow all the gunk out of my carburetor, and I'm going to be back on track again. And that worked until I was a 40-year-old intern in an emergency medicine residency. And I had, multiple back-to-back rotations doing shift work and got in pretty bad shape. And I got in kind of bad shape in medical school too, but 4th year of med school, I was able to kind of salvage that. But it was really hitting home in residency. And that was when I realized all the things that I used to do, it's not coming back as quickly. And really, I never had any formal education in kinesiology or exercise physiology other than what I had in medical school. So I said, well, I do have all this education now. Maybe it's time to start applying it. And so that was my aha moment was, hey, this is going to be harder for you, especially since you want to go back to special operations. So I had to put in more work, and I had to find, I don't want to say shortcuts because I don't like shortcuts, but I had to find better ways and more efficient ways of doing things when it came to getting back in shape and then maintaining my fitness. And fortunately, by the time I was on that walking up that mountaintop years later, that aha moment had already occurred. So that was kind of the culmination of everything that I had figured out as far as what I had to do as far as nutrition, fitness, and staying in the fight.
That's awesome. No, I read that, and even at 42, listening to that mission set, I was kind of cringing, and then when I read you were 48, it really opened my eyes. And something that I have highlighted in the book is your approach and how you talk about it. And you say, hey, if you approach health and fitness as a hobby or as a chore, you're never going to be 100% committed. And I'll quote you here directly: by embracing the warrior ethos and placing the mission of optimal health and wellness ahead of other pursuits, you can unlock your life as a warrior athlete. Can you talk about, like, when you say warrior athlete, what are you talking about? What does that mean to folks?
Yeah, to me, the warrior athlete is just that every day you wake up and that's your mission in life. Your mission in life is to pursue your ultimate version of physical fitness, be the best version of you physically and mentally that you can possibly be. Not pursuing somebody else's goals, not measuring yourself against others, but knowing that you dedicated that day to being a slightly better version of yourself each and every day. And this goes all the way back. If you think all the way back to the Spartans in the era of King Leonidas and Thermopylae that we've all seen movies about and we're all familiar with, that's what their lifestyle was like. They woke up each and every day, and their priority wasn't, hey, I think I'm gonna go on a nice walk, and I'm gonna pick some flowers, and I'm gonna paint or write poetry. That wasn't their unlike the rest of Greece as a nation state at the time. That wasn't their priority. Their priority was, all right, I'm gonna get up every day. I'm gonna do physical activity that better prepares me for war. I'm gonna put fuel into my body that is optimal and is gonna help me be the best version of myself that I can be. I'm going to inspect my kit. It's going to be the first thing that I look at every morning when I wake up, is making sure my kit is ready for battle. And it's the last thing I do every night before I lay down to bed. Is my kit ready? If I have to get up and be in battle on 5 minutes notice when that sun comes up, is all of my kit ready? And everyone who's been in the operational military is already familiar with this, right? You enter a patrol base, you have priorities of work. You make sure that your crew serve weapons are ready to go. Your individual weapons are ready to go. Your sectors of fire are set. Your claymores are out. Everybody knows where an emergency rally point is. All these things have priority. Security, these all have priority over your individual comfort, right? Your individual, getting some sleep, eating something. I don't know what in today's military, maybe you're pulling out your phone and checking your email. I don't know. I've been out for a little while. But all these other things have priority over that. And that's what life is like as a warrior athlete, that my priority each and every day is being a physically and mentally sharper and better version of myself than I was the day before. And once you embrace that, it doesn't even seem like work anymore. And as you mentioned, if the far flip side of that is people who just see it as a hobby. And people who see it as a hobby, I can always spot them in the gym. We're in a new year right now, so a lot of them aren't in there right now. But typically, those are the people that you spot in the gym. The kind of the quintessential version of this is there were a couple of guys actually when I was on that deployment. We worked out in a gym that was common to everyone on post. So it wasn't all people from the task force. It wasn't all people from the MAU or from the Rangers that were working out there. And there were these two guys in particular that were in the gym probably 4 or 5 days a week, but they spent way more time watching the TVs mounted in front of the treadmills and chit-chatting with each other and checking their phones. I never saw a bead of sweat break out on either one of them. So to them, it was a hobby. It's like, oh, okay, now's that time of day where I go to the gym and I kind of hang out and I drink my smoothie and I talk with my buddies. And if you're approaching fitness that way, the big statement you always hear from people like that is, well, the most important thing is I showed up, right? Well, not really. We've kind of convinced ourselves of that, but that's not really the most important thing. So if you're looking at fitness as a hobbyist, you're never going to have that burning desire to look back on each day and say, what was my progress today? Am I holding myself accountable? And then the people that see it as just an absolute chore, I have to work out. If you hear that groan beforehand, if you don't love it, I mean, you're just never going to enjoy doing it. And we all knew, we all had guys like that in our unit, right? That it's like they do it, but they really didn't like it, and those are the guys you run into a few years later, and they've had this physical transformation, and not in a good way, right? Because they showed up for PT every morning and they did it, but they looked at it as a chore. And those are the guys that they get out and they're like, I'm never doing that again. And you have to find that zone where it is your mission in life, and it is what you're dedicating yourself to. And then you develop a love, and sometimes it's a love-hate. It's when I'm throwing up in a trash can in the corner of the gym, that's not fun, but I know that I'm accomplishing something.
So yeah, speaking of that, and the warrior athlete kind of mentality and approach, I think the other side of the coin, and this kind of segues nicely into it, is the cost that all these years of being an operator had on your body. And I like how you laid that out there, missing cartilage, torn ligaments, fractures in your foot, 4 herniated discs in your spine, 2 shoulder issues, all these kind of chronic injuries. My question for you is that just the cost of kind of putting the mission first, or are there any things looking back now, knowing what you know now with all that experience, that you could have done differently to maybe prevented some of those injuries?
Great question. You're right. This is the perfect segue, because if we had just signed off after what I said before, that is the mentality that people would probably take from that. That okay, that's my mission. So, toes be damned. Knees. Hey, you're just gonna have to suck it up. But the fact of the matter is you can have both, right? The problem is, and again, I came in the military in the 1980s, and not only was I younger then and more pliable then, but we didn't know. When I think of how ignorant we really were about physical training in the 1980s military, I mean, we really had no idea. There was no good comprehensive plan. And then later, of course, I think in the 90s, they came up with Master of Fitness, which I can almost guarantee you there was not any degree of exercise physiologist involved in coming up with that program, because it really was just more of the same. It was the old Army mentality. And the old Army mentality very much was, mission is over everything. You're expendable. Individuals are expendable, and individual body parts might even be expendable, right? So we are gearing towards, instead of gearing up towards peaking in longevity, we were gearing towards peaking in performance, right? We want the best absolute performance we can get out of you as a soldier right now. And whatever that means is, when the bill comes due later, we're not concerned with that. We want you to be able to carry as much and move this fast and be awake for this many hours and be this effective for this period of time. And if that means you injure yourself or burn out your endocrine system or damage your, herniate discs in your spine, okay, that's just the cost of doing business. That's the cost of mission readiness. Well, the fact of the matter is you need to have an eye on what I call longevity optimization, which means you're not only going to be able to do the mission at hand right now, but you're going to be able to at least get out of the chair and walk across the room when you're in your 60s, right? And the way that you can set that up is by always having the eye on longevity. If you always have an eye on longevity, you'll be able to reach peak performance in the short term. Maybe it'll be a couple seconds here or there, but you won't quite make. But in the long term, you can have both if you're looking towards longevity. If you only have an eye on performance, then sooner or later you're going to have neither. You know, you're going to burn out and you're not going to be able to have peak performance and optimize your performance, you know, maybe even in your 30s or 40s. And you certainly aren't going to have longevity because your MRIs are going to look the way that mine look now, just, you know, like a roadmap of disaster. So for anybody who's listening to this, if you're still in your 20s, start thinking about longevity now. Start thinking about, you know, listen to your body now. Work out smarter, not harder now. And the biggest problem with that we see in the military is shortcuts. Is, you know, we do these pre-mission ramp ups, or we do exactly what I was talking about before, which is you go on leave or you go to a school, you come back and they're like, hey, we got such and such coming up. We got EIB coming up, or we have this endurance event coming up. All right, so now I got to put 6 months of physical training in 2 weeks, right? I got to get in better shape right now. And so you take shortcuts, and that's shortcuts, as I say in the book, shortcuts pave the way to injuries. And a lot of the injuries that I have are directly related to shortcuts. I was trying to get a lot of performance optimization in a short period of time. And so I took shortcuts, or I pushed my body just a little bit too hard. And subsequently, I ended up with injuries. And a lot of those injuries are still with me today. They're not injuries that healed and that I could get over.
No, that's great. I'm glad I wanted to touch on that. So thank you for kind of going into that. It's important for tactical athletes to start thinking about longevity now versus you know, later down the road.
And again, because if you think about longevity, you can have both. If you only think about performance, you're going to have performance, but sooner or later it's going to run out, and then you're not going to have either.
Right. So one of the things we kind of talked about is getting set up for this podcast that I definitely want to touch about is you are unapologetic about the dangers of obesity. And you post on that regularly. I've seen. Do you feel that these dangers are being ignored now? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think there's layers to this as to the why. I would, if I had to point to one thing above all else as to the why, I would say that the average has become obesity. The average person in our society is obese, or at least overweight. And because the average has skewed that way, and we see it more, then it's become more acceptable. You know, it's you don't look, a person who, if they were walking around on the streets in the 1960s, people would have said, and if somebody would have said, hey, who's that fat person? Everybody would have known right away who they were talking about, right? That same person walking around the street now, you make that same statement, they're basically blended into the crowd because we've all gotten bigger. That's the fact of it. The BMI of the average person now is higher than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So it's become accepted because it's become the average. I'm not going to say it's become the norm, because norm means normal, and that's not normal. It's average, but it's not normal. So that's probably the biggest driver behind it. I'd say the second biggest driver behind it is there's been a push in recent years, very well intentioned, which is, body positivity and, making, discouraging things like what we call fat shaming. And fat shaming is a real thing, and it's cruel, and nobody should tolerate it. But there's a difference between fat shaming, i.e., calling somebody names, calling somebody a fat person, or, making comments about their weight, giving them unflattering nicknames, or just putting them down, bullying them because of their body habitus. That is wrong. But at the same time, you don't want to lift up unhealthy habits. And I think we've, again, it started out very well intentioned, that we wanted people to feel good about how they are, be in a good place mentally. Because being a good place mentally means you can then address that physical aspect and get better, right? You can lose that weight and become healthier. Well, now the pendulum has swung so far now, though, that we tend to lift up that unhealthy body habitus. And you see things like healthy at any size. Well, that's not true. You can't be 600. I don't care. You can't be 600 pounds and healthy. You just can't. It's just not possible. All right. So making statements like healthy at any size it's dangerous. And I've had to be really careful with this, as a physician, you have a little public presence, and it has gotten me in trouble. I made a Twitter post a few years ago that my intention was to spread a positive message of health and wellness, and some people took the wrong way and tried to dox me, dox members of my family, called the state medical board, told them I was fat shaming people. And basically all I did, and you've seen the post, it's a post of 2 hearts that were, harvested from donors, one of which is a pretty healthy heart, which with some minor fat deposits of it. The other is a heart that's just absolutely covered in adipose tissue. And my point there was to illustrate that it's not just how somebody looks in clothes. There are internal effects that go on when you put on all this fat that you don't see that are affecting you. They're affecting your blood vessels, they're affecting blood flow, they're affecting organ function. Not to mention the fact that you're just hauling around more weight, which is more difficult for you, and all of the health effects that come along with that: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, the stress on your bones, the stress on your endocrine system, the increase in cortisol. If you're a male, we know that having more adipose tissue causes you a lot of problems with your hormonal axis. Your testosterone will be lower, estradiol and estrogen and progesterone will be elevated. These are all issues that you're going to have to deal with. So it's not just about how you look in a pair of jeans, how you look in a swimsuit, how you look at the beach. It's also about how your body is performing, and it is an issue of health and wellness. And the counter argument I always get to that is, well, there's unhealthy thin people too. You're not talking about those. Absolutely, there's unhealthy thin people, but that's a straw man argument when we're talking about this, because that's like me saying, hey, you should really wear a seatbelt. Well, some people wear a seatbelt and they die in car accidents. Okay, well, yeah. It's like some people wear a seatbelt and they think it's a license to drive 120 miles an hour. Okay, yeah, but we're not talking about those. We're talking about in general. So I try to do everything I can, as somebody who's struggled with weight, me personally, I got up to there's been twice in my life that I got up to almost 200 pounds. Once was in residency, and once was actually right before I was ready to send this book to editing, because during COVID I put on a bunch of weight. And the irony is I weighed, when I weighed myself, I weighed 197. I might have actually been higher than that. I was actually physically able to perform at a high level. I was working out 5 days a week doing strength and fitness. I was doing jiu-jitsu 2 nights a week. I had just finished a combative seminar that was a week long, where I was on the mat training in combatives for 8-hour days against high-level black belts. And I came out of that, feeling great. At the time, 54 years old, able to keep up with all these guys, stepped on the scale and was shocked by what I saw. So I was a pretty healthy fat at that point. I was 197 pounds. There's no denying it. I was fat. My cardio was good. My strength was pretty good. But there were some, my blood pressure was a little bit higher. I have some issues with sleep apnea. I was seeing that a little bit more. I was having some trouble sleeping. And it was taking me a little bit longer to get going. So I had to address that. And I cleaned up my diet and took a closer look at what I was doing as far as exercise. And basically I started, really practicing what I preach in the book. It's ironic that while writing the book, since it was during COVID, that I did kind of go off the rails, especially when it came to nutrition, but I was able to clean that up. And again, it's not about, I don't plan on putting on a pair of swim trunks and going to the beach and caring about how people look at me. To me, it's about my health and my performance and how I'm performing on the mat, in the training room, and being around long enough that I can play ball with my grandkids one day.
Goes back to that longevity. No, Mike, thanks for laying that out there. You did quite eloquently, and I appreciate that, because I do think it's important to point out the health issue that comes along with that. since, we talk a little bit about obesity and nutrition there, can you talk about, where do you go to for nutrition advice? Who do you look to? Are there books you recommend? What's your kind of nutrition protocol?
Yeah. So the best way that I have found to approach nutrition is not necessarily in who you talk to, but who you listen to, but who you don't talk to and who you don't listen to. So just because I think that's a little bit easier way to approach it, otherwise we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. I avoid anyone who is preaching exclusionary diets, and I have fallen into that trap before. I've done keto, and keto, if you do it smart and you monitor yourself properly and you do it for short periods of time, can it be effective? Absolutely it can. But when people are preaching extreme exclusionary diets, and probably the two at each end of the spectrum, you have vegans on one end and the carnivore diet on the other. And I disagree with both of those diets for various reasons. We're omnivores. Millions of years of evolution say that we're omnivores. We're geared to eat animal protein. Should we be eating more vegetables and more plant matter than most people do in their Western diet? Absolutely, we should. So when people say plant-based, we could get into a whole bunch of rabbit holes on terms that people use that mean different things to different people. When people say, well, you need to eat a plant-based diet. Yes, that's true. If by plant-based you mean that when you look at your plate, 2/3 of it is green leafy vegetables and fruits of different colors, and then a third, a quarter to a third of it is that animal protein. Yeah, I would consider that to be a plant-based diet. If you're saying a plant-based diet in that you don't get any animal products at all, no, we're not engineered to survive and thrive like that. Are there exceptions? Yes, there's exceptions at both ends of the spectrum, exceptions in veganism and exceptions in the carnivore diet. And I've taken heat from both ends of that spectrum after writing this book, that I didn't basically that I didn't say what their echo chamber is saying back with them, and they didn't like that. But so avoiding exclusionary diet is probably the number one thing that I can say. I'm fortunate enough that I'm friends with people like Mike Dolce, who's written a lot of books on this subject. He and I, for the most part, are in agreement on a lot of things. That you need a balanced diet. You need whole sourced. You need things as close to nature as possible. If my elevator pitch, when I'm telling people, when people say, well, what should I be eating? Again, my emphasis is always on what you shouldn't be eating. And then if you look at what's left, it becomes obvious. And what you shouldn't be eating is, if somebody's handing it to you in a bag through your car window, that's not for you. That's not good food. If it was in a can, then that's probably not great. And a can of chicken noodle soup is fine. I'm not saying that you can't eat anything that comes in a can. If it comes in a box, or if it's only available in the freezer section and only has microwave directions, right? These are all things that are not, they have a lot of preservatives. They're high in sodium. They're high in fat, probably high in a lot of added sugars to preserve the flavoring and preservatives. So these are things that are not for you. So the closer that you can get, ideally, if you pick it out of the ground or kill it yourself, that's perfect. So the closer you can get to that, the better. That's getting good lean cuts of meat and poultry from the butcher shop. Vegetables that still have a little bit of that smell of dirt on them that you get at the farmer's market, or get at HEB in the produce section. Try to, all the stuff that we do in modern society, so you can put it in a cupboard or you can put it in the fridge and it's going to last for a longer period of time. That's taking away from nutritional value. That's adding preservatives. That's adding sodium, adding unnecessary carbohydrates, and adding unnecessary fat. So you want to eat like the pioneers did. You want stuff that, is it going to go bad in a few days if you don't eat it? Yeah, but that's because it's natural and it's healthy for you. So that's the food that you want to be eating. And then as far as sorting out, portion size and everything else, I go into that in the nutrition chapter in the book. The key is you should never feel like you need to undo the top button on your pants. You should eat and feel a feeling of satiation when you finish a meal, but not necessarily fullness. I'm not completely stuffed. Um, you can count calories, you can count macros. I go into that in the nutrition chapter on if you are going to do that, how you go about doing that. Most people don't have time. And it's over time, it's painstaking, unless you're somebody who's preparing for some type of competition, either in, sports, bodybuilding, whatever that might be. That can take over your entire life if you're going to count macros, if you're going to count calories. And most people aren't prepared to do that. And I understand that. If you are prepared to do that, I give you an outline on kind of how to do that. But I think most people will find that over time, if you count macros for a month, then you get to the point where you can kind of just recognize, you can kind of put your thumb out there and do some Kentucky windage, and when you're eating the right things in the right proportions.
No, 100%. That's kind of where I'm at in my life. Having being a dietitian, have done it long enough. You do. I don't measure my food or anything like that. So I appreciate you saying that. I also like how you cite Mike Dolce there, because I think he was the first, for some of the folks listening to this who might be in the younger crowd, the first nutrition professional to work in mixed martial arts that I know of, at least. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, prior to Mike coming on, it was everything, especially in mixed martial arts. There was a lot of weird bro science,
Mm-hmm.
And I talked a little bit about that bro science in the book when I talk about, guys cutting weight would be like, oh, the last 48 hours I only drink distilled water, and it's like, whoa, what scientific study determined that? Oh no, my coach just told me to do that, and it's like, just the crazy stuff. I ate this many bananas on this day. All right, going all the way back to when I was a kid, they would say that, well, if you finish every meal with a half a grapefruit, the acid in the grapefruit will burn up all the calories and you won't gain any weight. I mean, it's completely ridiculous stuff, but it's, this was in the 1970s and 80s that people were saying this, but in a lot of ways we haven't necessarily progressed, because there's crazy stuff like that still out there. After every meal, take one of these, fat burner pills or, weight burner pills. And those are all just complete hooey. There's nothing to any of it. It's unless you're going to take a laxative right after a meal, it's really not going to make a difference.
Well, and you might appreciate this, Mike. I get that even today with some young soldiers and like MREs. They're like, well, I heard the MRE was like 4,000 or 5,000 calories, and I'm like, no, it's like 1,200 to 1,400. And yeah. I hear the gum's a laxative. No, it's not a.
They're still saying the gum's a laxative.
They're still saying. So it's still out there. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Now shifting gears, because one of the chapters I did want to definitely come and hit on was the final one. Where you talk about tribe, because that was really powerful for me to read. And there's a quote I want to read here is, "There's no challenge to finding others willing to be comfortable with you. What's difficult is finding people willing to be uncomfortable with you. The former group are friends, while the latter is a tribe." Can you talk a little bit about that quote, and then how do you find your tribe?
Yeah. The nice thing about a tribe in the year 2022 is because we have, for all the bad things there are about the internet and about social media, that actually makes it easier, in my opinion, to find a tribe, because you might be someplace remote. You might be living in Montana or Alaska, someplace where working out of a home gym, where you just, the idea of finding people to do that with you and motivate you is difficult. But to go back and reflect on kind of the whole quote, I've got a lot of people that I know that I can call right now and say, hey, you want to come over for a cigar and a whiskey tonight? And they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, no problem. Hey, you want to come over? I'm gonna throw a brisket on. You want to come over? Yeah, absolutely. I'll be there. But there's not a lot of people that you can say, hey, you want to do a Murph about 3 hours from now? You want to go do a Murph? Crickets. It's, you don't, finding those people is a little bit more. Hey, you want to go choke each other and and simulate breaking each other's limbs for 2 hours sometime this afternoon, and you're just not getting the response. So seeking those people out is the key. And to me, a good starting point is the social media and these forums. I wear, this isn't a paid promotion, but I wear a MyZone heart monitor, which is a good heart monitor. I do have some issues about the company as it applies to their appreciation or lack thereof of endorsements, but we won't get into that. There are MyZone groups on Facebook that you can get into, and people post their workouts and what they did, and how many calories they burned. Same with we have a Peloton bike in my house. There are online forums for Peloton where people get on, talk about rides that they did, talk about getting together to do group rides and things of that nature. There's a ton of jiu-jitsu groups, there's CrossFit groups, there's Spartan race groups, ultra marathon groups, Ironman competition groups. There's all these groups on social media. And the great thing about these groups is you can come in as a complete novice who's never actually done any of this stuff. Like maybe you're just thinking about it. And you can say, hey, this is who I am. I'm X years old. This is my background. I'm coming to the table with, these injuries or conditions. What's your advice for me? And where is someplace near me? And I especially see this is really common, especially in the jiu-jitsu community, that somebody will post, hey, I've never even been to a class. I live in Fort Myers, Florida. Where's a gym nearby? And within a matter of 10 minutes, 2 or 3 people will post, hey, I'm right down the road from you. Here's the gym where I go. You should come check it out. I'll be there on Tuesday. Why don't you come on down? So that's a good way to start networking with this tribe, because obviously if you look around at work and you're not seeing people that represent that type of tribe, or the people in your church group or your family or your neighbors, they don't represent that tribe. You have to be able to reach out, and thankfully that's one of the good things that, in spite of all the bad that social media does, that's one of the good things, is it can put you in touch with like-minded people that are into that type of thing. And likewise in the warrior athlete community, people that go to courses like Sheepdog Response puts on, Hill Country Combatives, and groups like that, they link up and say, hey, where's, I want to do one of these tactical games, or I want to do this. Where do I get more information on doing that? And they'll help each other out. But the importance of a tribe can't be understated, because again, if I was living my ideal life, if I had a cabin in Montana somewhere, and I could stand on my roof and see the horizon in any direction with no other homes, that would be ideal. But I also wouldn't have anybody to motivate me, anybody to really hold me accountable. But with my phone and with social media, I'm linked up with all of my like-minded friends, all of my tribe, on my MyZone app. And if I'm not going to the gym, they see that I'm not going to the gym, and that's where I start to get these text messages. Hey, did you break your leg? What's going on? You haven't logged a workout in 4 days. What's the issue here? And that's how we hold each other accountable. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be spoken. I just know that I didn't work out on a Monday, Tuesday, and all of them did. I know that they're all seeing that, and I know that I'm being judged. Nobody wants to be judged, right? So that's a motivator in and of itself. But these people are out there, and it's anybody who doesn't have a good starting point, I would say start on social media, and then the next step is, whether you're going to a local CrossFit box or a local jiu-jitsu school, then you go there and you start to link up with people that become your tribe. And most gyms like that, whether it's a jiu-jitsu gym or a CrossFit box or a running club, they'll say, hey, give me what's your phone number? I'll put you on the group me, we all chat on the group me. And then you're continuing to expand the network there, because people are posting, hey, I've decided I'm going to do an open mat in my garage on Saturday, or I've decided I'm going to go run an 8-miler on Sunday. Is anybody interested in coming along? And that opens the door for you for all these like-minded people who have that warrior athlete mentality. And you get that nice synergistic effect of, you're motivating them, they're motivating you, you're all holding each other accountable. And again, I don't think it can be overstated how important that tribe mentality is.
No, that's great. I really like that. and something I see the tribe kind of going into, that I talked about a guest we had on, a drill sergeant who's kind of transitioning out of the Army, and how difficult that can be. And you talk about a little bit in the book is that transition out, kind of finding your identity when you leave the Army. So what was the biggest struggle for you, and then advice you would give to some of these soldiers that might be listening to this that, might transition out in the next few years?
Yeah, so I had and I don't remember if I specifically mentioned it in the book or not. The day after I got my DD-214 and I'd signed all my retirement paperwork, like 24 hours later, I was in my car and I had like a 5-minute little mini identity crisis issue, and it was weird because it's me sitting here talking to you, if we were in a meeting in person, there's so many things that I know about. You're Ranger qualified, you've got a combat scroll, you got a lot of scare badges on your uniform, right? So I can see your rank, of course, right? So I know how long you've been around, I know the types of things you've seen, and it's a resume that you wear, right? And because we're from the same military culture, none of that has to be explained to me, right? Like I understand all of that. Knowing that I was going to transition from that military culture into the civilian culture, and that I wasn't going to be, basically wearing my resume on my chest anymore. It's like, wow, for 32 years, whenever I walked into a room, I never had to explain myself. Everybody in the room knew who I was, they knew where I'd been. They knew where I was coming from. They probably knew a lot about what my outlook on things was. There were a lot of preconceptions were made, most of which were probably right. And I'm not going to have that anymore. I'm starting all over. After 32 years, I felt for just a second, I felt like I was starting all over. Like every time I walk into a room, I'm going to have to prove myself, explain myself. I'm not going to speak the same language. I don't come from the same core values as any of these people. We don't have that shared history, and that shared sense of being a part of something bigger than ourselves together. So that's going to be weird. That's going to be awkward. And it only lasted about 5 minutes. And the voice in my head said, hey, you're the exact same person that you were yesterday. None of that has changed. You take your values with you everywhere you go. You are who you are, and your uniform has never been what's opened the doors for you. It's been you all along, and it's going to continue to be you. And that's something that I would say to anyone who's listening to this, who's still on active duty, and maybe that transition is just a little ways down the road. You have gotten a lot of really valuable things out of being in the military, and the military it's been a two-way street, right? You've given tremendous things to your military family, and you've had things imparted to you in the form of trainings and certifications and just life experience. And recognize that you have that, and no matter what, you take that with you everywhere you go. And anytime you walk into a room in the civilian world, you bring that with you, and you have something that 97% of the people in that room probably don't have. And anybody else in the room who does have it, they are your brother and sister, and you have that together. And that's something that you can capitalize on together, and you can make changes within organizations based on that. But just recognize that you get out, you're not wearing the uniform anymore, you're not cutting your hair anymore, you're not shaving every day, not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning anymore necessarily, but you still have all those things. You're still the same person. You're still the person who wore that uniform. Now you're just in a different environment. So don't think for a minute that all of that doesn't carry with you, and take advantage of that.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. One quote in the book too, kind of back there towards the tribe, I want to ask you about is you say if you're the toughest person kind of in your circle, you need to go find another circle. Do you tell your friend Tim Kennedy that?
Tim has been present when I have said that, and Tim does that.
Yeah.
So believe it, everybody's like, yeah, Tim's a badass. I've seen Tim, yeah. And so Tim actually kind of espouses that probably even more than I do. I've seen him get in there and mix it up with Division I wrestlers because he knows they're going to show him a problem set that he's never encountered before. And there are a couple people I've seen him on the mats with or in the sparring ring with that he'll get in there deliberately because he knows they have a problem set that he has never been faced with before. He's going to have to solve. That's Tim and Ben Askren are friends. And we all know what kind of wrestler Ben Askren is. Tim's gotten on the mat with Cautera and rolled with him. Two completely different jiu-jitsu backgrounds. Tim coming from a jiu-jitsu background of this as it applies to MMA / applies to Army combative / applies to combat, whereas Cautera comes from a background of it's sport jiu-jitsu, it's in the gi, and this is the way you do it. And Tim enjoys that because he recognizes that if weight, aside from the obvious weight difference in those two individuals, and people, not everybody listening probably knows who Cautera is, but in a fight, Tim would just annihilate him. But in a jiu-jitsu competition where the rules are a little bit rules apply, things change, and Tim likes that. Give me the constraint of those rules. Let me do something stupid like tie one arm behind my back, as if it were completely disabled, and try things different. So that's not something, to answer your question, that's not something I have to tell him because it's something that he already lives, and he does seek those people out. And it's a little bit harder for him to seek those people out than it is for me. It's relatively easy for me to find people that can kick my ass. Tim has to search a little bit farther, but luckily he has a larger network and a bigger name, so that makes it a little bit easier for him.
Helps him. No, I was kind of teasing with that, but I like that quote because, and I'm glad you talk about it in terms of growth and accomplishments is not being afraid. I took that as not necessarily for combatives, certainly for jiu-jitsu, certainly, but just in other things, whether it's speaking, doing a podcast, writing, anything is not being afraid to go in the deep waters and struggling a little. So hopefully that's what some of the soldiers take from that.
Yeah, and I would say and I have seen this among the my military retiree brethren, including and maybe even especially retired Rangers and Special Forces operators, that you get out and you become really accustomed to being the toughest guy on the cul-de-sac, right? And it makes you a little bit overly comfortable because you're not getting challenged. You're not with your squad. You're not with your A detachment anymore. You don't have those other A-type personalities pushing you and, maybe ragging on you a little bit and exploiting your weaknesses a little bit. It's well, hey, again, when I first got out and I was going to the hospital, and one of the hospital security guys, a uniformed security officer, telling somebody else, well, if it ever goes down, don't call security, call Dr. Simpson, because he's the toughest guy in here at night. It's that feeds your ego a lot, but it also will end up making you complacent. I mean, is being the toughest guy in the hospital at night really, is that a major title? Is that ranking up there with UFC middleweight champion? Not really. So, find people that are going to push you. Walk into a room where when I train with the guys from Code 4 Concepts, Chad Lyman, Jay Wadsworth, Jason Repsch, Ari Kanazen, Gareth Hornell, I walk onto that mat and I know there is not a person in that room that couldn't just totally destroy me while eating a taco with the other hand and then laugh about it. And that's a good place to be because I am always going to be fighting uphill. I'm always going to be challenging myself. It's going to be because of how old I am. I would say for most people, it would take years to get to a level where you're comfortable with that. I'll probably get comfortable with that right about the time that I'm getting a walker and hanging it up for good, because these guys are already so many light years ahead of me, and I'm older than all of them. So I'll probably never catch up, and that's a good thing. It's like having that rabbit running out in front of you on a PT test that you can't catch that individual, right? But as long as you keep saying I'm gonna go as fast as I can to try to catch him, it's going to improve your time.
No, I love that. That's great advice for physical training and great advice for life there, Mike. I appreciate it. Where do folks, where can they find you on like social media if people want to see some of your work or follow you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, Dr. Mike Simpson, DrMikeSimpson. My company is Graybeard Performance. We're a life and lifestyle brand for dudes over 40. I say dudes over 40 because I've never been a woman over 40, so I can't really market to that. Although really anybody over 40 or even below 40 who wants performance optimization along with longevity optimization and to keep being a savage on in the second half of your life. This brand, Graybeard Performance, is the brand for you. And Graybeard Performance has its own Instagram account and own Facebook page as well.
Okay, no, thanks. I want to be respectful of your time. I could, I could talk to you for hours. A lot of great experience you shared, but I appreciate you having you on. Love the book, and this is, Nick Barringer, bought with his own funds, read on his own time. No official Army endorsement, but a lot of the lessons learned here, as someone over 40 applied to me. You can tell I've got it all marked up and highlighted. So great book. Thanks again, Mike, for being on. Really enjoyed it, and I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode. So thanks, everyone, for listening in. This has been the Fuel the Fight podcast.